Hey man, I know I don't want to put you on the spot too much, but like usually we just start off like a quick intro so that way you can kind of get people, maybe it'll jar some questions. So just tell us
Cool.
what you're doing right now, man.
Yeah, so I'm a physical therapist in Orange County, California, and I have a little office that's attached to a big gym. It's a, warehouse style facility. Half of it is a CrossFit gym, and the other half, it's kind of an imaginary line. The other half is Juggernaut Training Systems. So they're kind of, in-house headquarters. So my office is attached to all that stuff, and so it's kind of a perfect environment. Most of my clientele are barbell sport athletes, so it's weightlifting, powerlifting, CrossFit, strongman, and then the rest are team sport guys, football, basketball, and anybody else who kind of walks in the door. And so very active, super active approach. It's kind of my practice and philosophy. And then I myself compete in the sport of weightlifting, and then played college football at a small D1 AA school in Indiana. So that's just kind of bringing the worlds together, I guess, in a nutshell.
That's
That's
awesome, man. I think that's what's great about you is, and things that we need are people that can bridge the gap and like kind of see both ends of the spectrum and kind of inform us in both ways. So I think it's really valuable. So, I know you do. Talk to me about clinical athlete too. So what
yeah.
exactly are you trying to do with that?
So clinical athlete it's a couple things. It's a directory, number one. So clinicalathlete.com has a map on at the bottom of the page, and so it's healthcare professionals that we've screened and that are kind of a part of our private forum that we trust to have just a better understanding for athletes. And so if you're an athlete and you're looking for healthcare or rehab or whatever, instead of just going to Google and hoping you get somebody that actually understands what you're doing, you can go on the directory at Clinical Athlete and find a provider who's been through our vetting process, essentially, and all their profile info is there, their background, and so you can kind of get to know them, and be more comfortable with it. And then it's all the clinicians on the map and healthcare students. We have a private forum, and so we discuss, current literature and best practice and all that stuff in regards to rehab and sports med. And then we have our continuing education courses that we run through Clinical Athlete as well, geared towards coaches, clinicians, and athletes. And so it's all kind of, I guess, a educational portal, and then, a way for athletes to be united with the right healthcare provider.
Phenomenal. And that's what you run the clinical weightlifting coach certifications through and stuff.
Correct. Yep.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I've been hearing a lot of good things about that. Chris, from Warhorse he's actually up there in the corner. I don't know where he is,
Yeah.
but he's seen you a couple times, and
Yeah.
really excited to hear you talk today. So I'm going to bogart you for one more question before I let everybody else jump in.
Okay.
So I saw you post something about needling a little while back, and
Dry needling?
yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So
Okay.
I'm curious what your take is. Let's just go there. Because I know
Okay.
you posted kind of something based on the research of different interventions and how it compares to something else. And I'm just curious what you have to say about it.
Yeah. So, this, if you ask me, if you were to say, oh, I want your take on cupping or instrument assisted soft tissue, or, insert your modality here, it's going to be along the same lines, probably what I'm going to say about dry needling. Now, I'll preface this by saying, we can't even in the state of California, I can't even dry needle legally. So I don't do it. And so that's kind of pushed me away from learning more about it. I'm not going to invest the time and money regardless if I can't do it anyway. So that's just, just prefacing that. The literature regarding needling is a bit inconsistent in regards to what we don't know is how it works. And by works, in this case, would, short-term increase or decreases in pain perception, maybe short-term increases in range of motion, something like that. We don't know the mechanisms to which it does those things. There's some evidence that it does provide short-term pain relief, short-term, different outcome measures, range of motion, subjective like questionnaires, the patient feels better after a treatment or two. But that's the case with a lot of manual therapies and modalities, providing some type of short-term relief. The problem with not being able to explain how it works is then we don't have a streamlined approach of when to use it. Who's the most appropriate? Like take medication, for example. with medication, we know the mechanisms, we know what it does physiologically, and it's controlled versus placebo. Those things are studied and they're controlled. So when somebody takes a medication, we know the physiological effect, and then we can better prescribe who's appropriate, who's not. And it drives our assessments. With things like dry needling and other modalities, we don't have that. We don't have the mechanism. So we really don't know who's going to benefit and who's not. And that's the problem. And that's, even if, I'll be honest, even if I could dry needle in this state, I probably wouldn't invest the time and the money to learn, because I can't explain what I'm doing. I wouldn't be able to explain it to the patient. They're going to ask me, what does this do? And we don't know. So for me, I'm not gonna invest, and I'm not gonna charge somebody for something that I can't explain. And may have been rooted in a fairly large placebo effect. So that's just kind of where I stand on that. I understand the rationale with clinicians who use it, but I think it's also important to understand the bias. When you have invested thousands of dollars in a certain modality, you're going to be more apt to back it.
Totally.
Do you know what I mean? So we're all biased. So that's does that answer your question at all?
It does. It really does, because I'm just curious, because we have a pretty good clinician that we refer to, and he's a good dude, and he works really well with us in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
But every time someone comes back to us from going to see him, like, okay, so what did the doc do this time? He's like, well, he needled here, and then he needled here, and he did this. Like, and at some point I'm just like, man, what the fuck are you doing? Like, everybody can't need these needles the way that you're doing this. You know what I mean? So
that's the thing. It would be like going to a physician and everybody who resembles us the same thing gets the same medication. Like, he gave me this script and this, you know what I mean? So I can't fault it, but I do think it goes into the whole, like, it takes, like, getting certified in dry needling is expensive. Yeah. And it's also very, very time consuming. You need hundreds of hours. And so once you've got it, like, why wouldn't you use it? It's this cognitive bias thing. And so I think that's not just dry needling. This is a lot of modalities. This is
Sure.
Sometimes we get pigeonholed into the types of interventions that we've just decided to go all in on. And it biases our thinking a little bit. And that's one reason why I try to step back away from all that stuff. And I just don't use a lot of that stuff in general. And it's just more of an active approach. And I think some people would say that limits my options, but that's my point. That's what I want. I want to keep it simple. And if athletes have the expectation of wanting those things, and I meet them where they are, I say, this is why we're probably not going to do that. This is what the literature shows. If they insist, if that's what they want, and I've informed them of what will happen with me, I'll refer them to a clinician who I know is, will do it, as long as I've informed them. I think that's the best bet. For the clinician that you're asking about, what I would question is what he's telling the person. How it works. When the athlete asks, what is this doing? I'm curious to know what he says in that scenario. And I'm also curious to know how his assessment steers the ship.
Sure.
So that's yeah.
No, that makes total sense. That's really where I was going. 'Cause it's like, and that's the thing about assessment is, like, is there enough of I guess, is the lens big enough? Are we looking through a big enough lens to really see where we need to go to be able to say, well, like, I'm going to needle this person's shoulder and then also this person's hip and then do this and then do that. And really, like, it seems to me, because it's like, I guess from my limited understanding of it, is most of it is based on if you have some kind of trigger or whatever in the tissue, this is supposed to alleviate the tissue. And it's like, I don't know that we totally have an understanding of what a contracture actually is either. So that's why I asked that question.
That's exactly right. We don't trigger the notion of a trigger point. The term trigger point hasn't been substantiated itself. So now you're using a modality that we don't know how it works. And so it hasn't been controlled, and you're looking to intervene on something that we haven't even defined. In your estimation was a trigger, what you used was a trigger point, for example. So it's just, there's not very good science in just all facets. This is not needling. This is our profession in general. This is the knock on it, man. Our assessments are shit just as a whole, and that's what's kind of holding us back a little bit. But that's why I think that's why we have to step back and just kind of keep it simple again. You know what I mean? Or that's my bias, at least. Needling, the mechanism, it's some type of sensory input. It's like if I hit my, if I jam my finger and I shake it, I'm like, shit, and it's just like a natural reaction to send another sensory input to try to override the pain. If I knock my knee against the table, I'm going to rub it. It's the same type of deal. Needling is probably just a more invasive version, probably a stronger input, but past that, we don't know. And so it's some type of sensory input, and people have defined that as like neurophysiological effect. And that sounds pretty cool, but like what neurophysiological effect? Which one? And past that fancy term, we have no other explanation. And then neurophysiological effect starts to look a lot more synonymous with placebo, which is inherent in everything. There's placebo with exercise. Totally. We want to maximize placebo, but to use that as the only rationale for treatment, I don't know.
I get you, man. I get you. I appreciate it. Anybody else have any questions?
I got one.
Go ahead.
All right. This is a 2-part question, Quinn. Part 1, you guys have CECs for clinical athlete, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Is that meant for like both clinicians and coaches? Like, or do you have separate ones? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Are you talking about just like the courses or the accreditation for CEUs?
The courses in general.
Okay, it's both. So we have three different courses.
Mm.
They're all appropriate for both coaches and clinicians, but maybe based on the course, it might be like inverse, which one is going to get more out of it. So the CWC, the weightlifting course, and in this case, weightlifting is snatch and clean and jerk, is usually like a 70-30 split coaches to clinicians. So it's breaking down the snatch and clean and jerk and kind of optimizing positioning and training the lifts. But we also break it down into different rehab scenarios. So clinicians get a lot out of that as well. But that's definitely a coach's course. And then we have another one that's the same idea, but it's just for the squat, the deadlift, and the overhead press. But we break down those 3 patterns with all different corrective, approaches and different variations and progressions, regressions. And it's applicable to both clinicians and coaches, but definitely applicable to coaches. And then we have a course that's called the Scientific Principles of Sports Rehab, which is much more on the clinical side. And so coaches will still get something out of it, but it's more geared towards clinicians and clinical practice and rehab.
Very cool.
Yeah. Yeah, it's good. It's good. We're excited about the courses. That's for sure.
Cool. Thank you.
I took the weightlifting course. It's awesome.
There you go.
Talk it up, man.
Wes, did you have the second part?
Boost it.
No, he answered it. He answered the second part, but follow back, Quinn. All right?
Okay. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Jesus Christ. Who else wants to jump in?
I have a question.
Go ahead, man.
All right. So we have compared to where a lot of these guys live, a kind of rural community. There's only like 50,000 people in our area. And there's not a lot of like PT offices or anything. And we do have a pretty good relationship with one of the guys. And I'm trying, what I've been wanting to do for a little bit now is kind of develop that relationship further, because like he doesn't necessarily refer people to us, but if we have clients that go to him, like he'll respond back to us. And so like when you're looking at trainers and facilities and stuff like that, like people you trust, like what's kind of the stuff you're looking for, or what's some of the stuff we can do on our end, like providing feedback or maybe sending over like our programming or something for, clients that are going to him.
Yeah.
That we can use and develop a little more trust and rest.
Yeah, I think I got the gist. You were breaking up a little bit, but I think I got the gist of your question. Is what type of practitioner? Is it a PT Chiro, not that it matters. I'm just curious. PT, chiro, doc.
He's a PT. He's a
Okay.
PT.
Okay. So a couple things. I could speak on like my experience is what's helped me build relationships with coaches is definitely having an open line. And so anytime an athlete comes to me, they may come to me from a gym that I've never heard of or from and I always ask who their coach is, and I get their coach's phone number and email. And after the person leaves, I always ping the coach. And I say, this is, and I kind of CC the athlete. I say, this is what we're doing. This is what we saw, just so we can all be on the same page. And it's not this like turf war, PT said this, but coach is saying that. So that's kind of, not to say that practitioner has to do that, but maybe you put it upon yourself to open up a line of communication and see how that person responds. And if they're open, you'll get the feel of how, you know what I mean? If they're open to communication and they truly care about the process, or if they're just kind of like, I'm not getting paid for this extra email time, which I get. And then they're kind of short with you. But that would be one thing, like how willing is the practitioner to have an open dialogue with you? And, you can ask about their model a little bit. I wouldn't say that like clinics where it's not one-on-one is a deal breaker, but there are physical therapy clinics where there's 3 and 4 patients an hour, and the patient's seeing the aide and the tech more than they're seeing the actual therapist. And so just as a general rule of thumb, a clinic with a model where they're seeing 1 or 2 patients an hour is best, because the person's going to get the best care. I'd say that those are probably the 2 biggest, like patients an hour, and then how open the practitioner is to having a dialogue. Now, of course, there's how well do they actually understand what it is that you do in the gym. If ideally it's a PT who has some type of exercise experience themselves, and so they're not just trying to coach up a squat completely different than how you would. So kind of maybe read up on their athletic background a little bit. Not that Bill Belichick sucks at football, but he's won Super Bowl, so it's not like you have to you don't have to be a world champion. But for me, if I was gonna fix somebody's snatch positioning, overhead squat positioning, and I've never done that myself, I'm just kind of BSing it. So those are 3 big things. Check out if they've got any background, if they're willing to talk with you about things, and then exactly how their model is set up.
Okay.
Does that answer your question at all?
Yeah, I was kind of looking for some ideas just to kind of get basically some more open lines of communication back and forth.
I would just shoot them directly. Shoot an email, call them directly, and see what's what. I say, I got a couple questions for you. Thank you for seeing my athlete. Kind of put the ball in his court, because I'll be honest. Practitioners kind of sometimes feel that they're above the coach or the trainer. You're just being honest. Like, that's the way that a lot of them think. And that's not to say that he does. That's not to say that he does. But what I'm saying is put the ball in his court. Say, I really appreciate you seeing my athlete. And can you just walk me through some of the recommendations that you have, so I'm clear, so we're on the same page. And hopefully, he appreciates that and responds. And then, if you've got recommendations as well, hopefully he's open to that. But yeah, I would just try to communicate, and if he's open to that, then maybe he's a guy that you can stick with.
Okay. All right. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Trey, one thing that I've done is I actually got treated by the PT that you saw and that we have a relationship with now.
Yeah.
So that definitely helps open lines of communication. That's very good. So that might be one way to go about it. If you get treated by that person, it kind of gives you the opportunity to bounce ideas back and forth as far as your own treatment plan is concerned.
That's a good point. I actually did that. I've done that a few times where we're trying to make relationships with different gyms, and I'll have their coaching staff, each one of them come in for a complimentary session just to eval, just to, again, build a relationship like you said. And it would kind of be inverse for you. You calling him to see if you can get something, but in the long run, it would really let you know from the inside, how he runs his model and everything in that respect. So that's a good idea.
Well, yeah, it was exactly the second model you said. It was probably like 1 or 2 patients every hour, and it was very one-on-one, very hands-on, and you got a good sense of how he ran this practice.
Yeah, it's perfect.
Cool. What else we got, guys? Anybody else want to jump in?
Quinn, I was wondering how you feel about kind of the whole functional range conditioning, like cars and pails and rails, and like the perspective of a clinician on all of that stuff.
So my whole thing, listen, we could take all of the acronyms and the buzzwords and the branding out of the equation, and I really like the concepts. I think that I'm always talking about increasing load tolerance. We talk about the literature on tendinopathies and just graded exposure. I think taking joints to the end range that they can control, and then staying in those range and moving sustained muscular contractions. I think it all comes down to you're increasing your loading tolerance, you're loading connective tissues, and you're spending time, you're getting time and tension within those positions. And I think that's awesome. So I think it's great. I love the concepts. I do think that, branding, so rebranding some things, is just a good idea. I think that some of the principles that the PNF school of thought has been probably taking into the equation, they didn't define things very well, like the whole notions of like reciprocal inhibition, all these things have kind of been debunked. But the idea of taking a joint to its end range and then creating control and loading those tissues and creating some tissue resiliency and tolerance within those ranges has been around for a long time, and I like it a lot. I think that people see who've maybe never been to a course or don't understand it, they see like the flows, like some of these guys who are just messing around and they're moving around, they think it's cool.
Yeah, they're like,
but without the understanding that to get to that point, they've got all of the requisite joint range and all that stuff, and they're just messing around, they're just showing off. So it's good. And I've never taken a course, but from my understanding, they explain that, and it's like, no, you start with these low level, you start within your means, and you build tolerance, and this is a process, and it takes a long time. And so in that respect, I really like it. With that type of stuff, I think people can become too enamored with getting good at that and forget that you still have to like train and lift weights and do the other stuff. And that stuff is more adjunct, and people tend to inverse that stuff. It's the same with, it would be the same with like ROMWOD and MWOD and then whatever WOD and, all of that stuff. And I think at least to me, if I'm going to pick something out of that pot, FRC would be one of my first choices because it's active. You know what I mean? And you're controlling your own body.
Yeah, that's why I asked, because at the certification and everything you put out, and I live more in your train of thought with like, hey, load up your range of motion and then just take your time there and like explore it.
Right.
So, it's obviously just a lot of like rebranding of things that physical therapists or coaches have been doing for a long time, but it's good because it is doing what you just said. It's loading, even though most of it's like internal load, you're creating your own intrinsic forces, but that's a great place to start. I mean, from in a rehab scenario, initial stages when people can't really tolerate a whole lot of external load, it's great. Awesome. Yeah, cool. It's good stuff. Yep. Thanks.
Who else? Cool, my turn. Quinn, so yes. I'm curious, like, how did you build your lens, man? So maybe I think it would be interesting to hear kind of like, what's your process like? You got somebody coming in for an eval. How do you make decisions? How do you start with your eval, your assessment, and then like go from there? What's your flow chart?
Yeah, it's probably super basic to you guys, and very, very simple because I don't know anything else. But essentially, I'm looking at kind of 3 tiers: training tolerance or training volume, and these are also 3 variables that I may manipulate for treatment. So overall training volume, position, body position, and that can mean a lot of different things, but just kind of an overarching term, things that we can manipulate, and local tissues. So it all depends, you know, it all depends on context, and the psychosocial aspect of things it always plays a part. But let's just say it's patellar tendinopathy when squatting. So you get some anterior knee, you know, super common stuff. Anterior knee pain with squatting. The factors depend on a few things. So is it chronic versus acute? If it's chronic, we're defining as anything usually over 3 months. You know, that 3 month range, Mother Nature should have taken care of things. Typically these, and usually when I'm seeing them, it's chronic because people don't do anything about it at first, right? But you know, if it's acute versus chronic, because if it's an acute injury, we're not looking at causing or exacerbating the exact symptoms that people are coming in for. If it's chronic, a little bit of discomfort is okay. But let's just take those 3 tiers. You know, somebody's coming in, let's say they've been having anterior knee pain for 4 months with squatting. You know, aside from anything that I think is like a ligamentous injury, rule all that stuff out, training load. A lot of times when we got to work backwards to their history, because a lot of times, you know, the pain started 4 months ago. I'll say, what did your program look like the 2 or 3 months prior? And so many times people are like, yeah, you know, I started my small off 10 by 10. And then, you know, on top of the 6-day-a-week weightlifting program that I was doing, and I was, you know, training for the CrossFit Open. And then, you know, 8 weeks later, my knee started to hurt. I don't know. It's so weird. And so it's like, all right. So training dose, it's just dose response has so much to do with this. And so there's not an athlete that comes to my door that we're not talking about the program that they were on leading up. And sometimes it's the opposite. Sometimes people have taken time completely off. It was like, yeah, I took 2 months off, and it's so weird that I'm hurt now, because you would think I would have been fresh. But either they dosed their training too acutely, or they took time off and they were deconditioned, and then they had an acute spike. Even if the volume itself when they came back wasn't that high, it was still way higher than what they had been accustomed to, and they weren't prepared for that. So there's usually kind of an inflection point. It's more rare when their program is just perfectly dosed and it's been like slow progressions for 4 years, and all of a sudden something starts to sensitize and hurt. It's rarely that. So that's one piece of the puzzle, training dose. And in many cases, if we just modulate the programming, it takes care of a lot of issues. The second thing is that we can manipulate is position. And so it's like, all right, we know that we're going to hopefully build a little smarter program and you know, appropriately dose your training a little bit better. But also, you know, is there a positional trigger? Is it shin angle, knees forward versus or knee forward squat versus not, back squat versus front squat? Can we manipulate stance? Can we manipulate tempo? Different variables to try to change symptoms. Because if we can, and this kind of empowers the athlete too, because if they can change their position and make their symptoms either better or worse, then they're in control. And many times with the example I gave, especially, you can do that. You know, you can manipulate even range of motion. Slow down the squat. Don't go quite as low. Wider toes out versus toes. Some type of variable that we can manipulate to get them to squat without or with less symptoms than when they walked in the door, thinking that every squat's going to hurt. So that's big. So that's tier number 2 is position. And a lot of times those positional cues and corrections are just temporary. You know, ultimately you sensitize your issue, your knee, because your program was dumb. And so we're going to fix your program. In the meantime, we're going to alter mechanics of some pain-free training in. You've also got to look at if an issue is driven by load or intensity or just overall volume, because that way you can always structure your program to get a training effect without exacerbating your symptoms. So for example, if it's anterior knee pain with squatting, go back to our example, but it only occurs at 85% and above, well, it's real easy. So that's your threshold. That's your decrease. That's your loading tolerance threshold. Let's just build your volume at lighter loads, right? It's like common sense. But people just want to do that. But we can make light loads hard by manipulating tempo and obviously doing more volume. Some people can do, they can do 5 sets of 10 with 70%, but it's that intensity threshold for whatever reason. That's fine. So we back off the intensity because that's your trigger, build your volume. Your low tolerance will slowly increase. We adapt. That's just what happens. Sometimes it's overall volume. So let's say somebody's, squat workout was 4 sets of 8, And the first 2 sets were pain-free completely. Third set, the first 6 reps were pain-free. And then, rep 7th and 8th kind of got hairy. And then on the 4th set of 8, the entire set was painful. Well, that's more of a volume, kind of a decreased load tolerance to just overall work. So we have a few variables that we can mention. What if we just did sets of 5? What if we did 5 sets of 6 instead of 4 sets of 8? Maybe all of those reps would be pain-free. Maybe it's a fatigue thing, or just sets of 5, or cut off, only did 3 sets of 8 and dose it that way. So you've got to understand your triggers, because the mistake that people make, and this is not just knee pain, this is anything. The mistake that a lot of people make is they stop training completely because they can't do what's on the paper. It's like, oh, I can't work up to this intensity. Well, I'll take a day off. Or I can't get all the work in, so I just won't do it. I'll rest. And that turns into a few days, and they'll take a couple weeks off. And it's like, oh, you know what? I just took a month off to just make sure everything healed. But it goes back to what we said earlier, and the literature is starting to be very clear on this too. We don't want these spikes in either decreased workload or increased workload. We want everything to remain pretty constant. And if you can figure out a way to get a training response, find your triggers, get a training response without exacerbating your issues, while Mother Nature does her thing, it's really going to set you up for a nice even upswing, as opposed to, this type of deal. So, and then the third tier is local tissues. And so for the knee, for example, maybe we're doing some type of, specific quad thing to increase loading tolerance, be it an iso hold, some tempoed split squats, maybe some focused isolated hamstring stuff, tensioned, low level, but that's why it's lower on the tier. We're just trying to increase local tissue tolerance and really just decrease some of that pain perception, because the literature is pretty clear, or it's got some good evidence to show that like isometric holds will decrease your pain in that area. So it's like doing, if you have your back is a little sore and you do some like ab exercises, like some planks and stuff, you stand up and you're like, oh, I feel better. It's just like that. So with the knee, maybe we're doing some open chain iso holds, some, slow terminal knee extensions, some slow split squats, just some light stuff for this, and then manipulating position, whatever variable decreases your pain. And then over the top of all of that, we're looking at your program and dosing things a little bit more appropriately. So that's just kind of my overall approach. And I think it's probably a little biased towards my environment because, like I said, 90% of my clients are barbell athletes. So it actually makes it really easy. The sport is the practice is the sport. It's very objective, it's numbers based, so we can manipulate those things very easily. You get a football player that walks in the door, it's so hard because I know that, yeah, we can, I can make you squat and lunge a little bit better or less pain, but then you're going to go out in the field and you're going to do all different things with your body. That's where overall workload becomes so important, because trying to quote unquote fix somebody's movement patterns who's a team sport athlete just doesn't work, because there is no good or bad. It's whatever is going to get the job done. So yeah, that was a long-winded question.
No,
you probably didn't answer your question at all.
It was exactly what I wanted. I just, and then, so that's a real good look at like your lens and how you make decisions. And I like that. I like the simplicity of that, because I think a lot of people take that to a place that gets far too complex. But what about, so let's say from a movement standpoint, someone comes into your office with that patellar tendinopathy that you're talking about.
Yeah.
Where do you start from a movement standpoint to check your second level of your little triangle there?
Yeah. It just depends, because we still haven't defined movement in regards to a dichotomy, good or bad. And I'm not sure if we should, you know what I mean? So the way that I look at it is, there really is no there's no bad position. There are positions that are probably better mechanically to produce force, just from a physics standpoint, more leverage. So that's more of kind of what I go in line with. And then there's positions that may predispose your tissues to failure faster. And so you would need to dose those positions a little bit more slowly with force, like valgus knee, for example. If I go out there right now and actively valgus my knee as hard as I can under my max squat or like jump as hard as I can and valgus my knee on purpose, yeah, I'm probably going to fuck something up. But if I did that very slowly, I mean, you guys watch like Barry Sanders in slow motion run, and he should have torn his ACL like 400 times in one game. It's just like our tissues have the ability to adapt. And so as far as the movement question, it depends on the athlete, it depends on the sport and the goal. If it's just somebody who squats, it's a little easier because stacking your joints generally gives you better leverage. And so just from a squat standpoint, I care less about where they put their feet stance wise, because everybody's a little bit different, in regards to structure and leverages. But in general, I'm just looking for the knees to track, right over the middle of the foot. I'm looking for, when somebody squats down and I see them go into that huge stripper arch and they complain that I can't squat as deep as I want to, or I get pinching in the front of my hips, and they're squatting like a stripper and they don't even know it. Those are the things that I'm looking for as positional cues that we can manipulate, because we know that anterior pelvic tilt, alters hip flexion range of motion. That's just biomechanics. The more anterior pelvic tilt you have, the less end range hip flexion and internal rotation you have. For some people, it doesn't matter because they have plenty of excursion. It makes no difference. They can, vary their squat regardless. But for a lot of people who are already kind of like not the most tender of tigers, a super hard arch in the squat is probably going to limit your depth. And so if that's your complaint, like if you sense you feel pinching in front of your hips or you're not squatting as deep as you want to, pelvic position is something that we're manipulating. And so that's why I love giving somebody a counterbalance, like a weight, like a goblet squat, or hiking their heels up a little bit and then cueing the pelvis. I'll have them arch really hard, squat. How does that feel? I'll have them go pooping dog, squat. How does that feel? And then we'll start to go somewhere in the middle and groove that pattern. So generally, yeah, it's just stacking knees, letting the joints just hinge up and down. From an overhead standpoint, as far as just movement, I mean, honestly, my screenings are, can the joints get into the positions that I plan to load, period. So honestly, if somebody comes in and I really want to cut to the chase, I get them on the table and I flatten their back a little bit and I just take their arm and I see what excursion they have passively. Like, can your joint even go there? And if it flops to the table behind them, that's enough for me. Now it's up to my job to just find the appropriate loading strategy for them. Maybe they've got the range of motion. I know that. I tested it. Maybe now it's just cueing a slow tempo to overhead press, landmine press with a little bit of a lean. Just depends on where they're at. If their joints don't go there, the shoulder, for example, I take their shoulder and it only goes to there, and their goal is to put a bar over their head. It's like, well, okay, maybe we could stand for that joint to get into the position first. So we'll find strategies for that. I like a supine pullover where I'm holding a PVC with a little bit of load and they're on their back and slowly eccentrically loading those tissues. I like the shoulder just hangs from the bar, but you're kind of actively controlling that position and being there for a sustained period of time. So can the joints get into the positions kind of dictates my strategy. If they're with the squat, for example, with barefoot on flat ground, sometimes they look like the most inflexible person in the whole world. Their squat looks like a baby giraffe. And then as soon as you put a kettlebell or a counterbalance in their hands, all of a sudden they look like Gumby. They've got all the range of motion. So if I had stopped at the air squat, I probably would have said, oh, your joints don't go there. We have to do, a bunch of mobilization and stretching and passive stuff. But you give them another regression, give them some slack, and all of a sudden the joints go into the positions. I'm good. I'm good as far as that's concerned. That's kind of my deal.
Yeah. That makes sense. So it's like, from what I'm understanding is you take the passive approach. Let's look at what we actually have from a raw material standpoint. And then from there, it's like, what patterns are we actually going to load? And can you get into those positions to just load? It's not necessarily that there's this, and I'm not saying that there's no, it's a very individualized approach dependent on the person that's in front of you.
It's hard to define good and bad movement.
I get it.
It really depends. And even, yeah. So the answer is yes. And with the passive thing, that was more of an illustration of like to really get down to the nitty gritty. But I usually I take a top down approach, and we start on our feet, and we just keep progressing. If it does end up where I need to get them on the table and see, like, let me just make sure your joint even goes here, then that's what we do. But
Totally.
in general, it's a movement screening as I'm sure that, very similar to what you would do. But I have gotten away from the whole dichotomy of what's good and bad.
I understand that.
Yeah.
It seems very environmentally dependent, and that's actually like Damien asked the question about FRC, and I've been through FRC. I helped teach it a couple times.
Yeah.
And your goblet squat example actually illustrates my main criticism of FRC, which most of it I really like. You just have to really know how to fucking use it.
Right.
But it's an environmental thing, right? So you completely change someone's environment with that load, and the joint function change completely. So if you don't look at things in that way and just assume that this joint won't go there, I'm going to either hammer it with some kind of isometric or passive stretch. And it's just like, well, you're just trying to will something that's not there. Whereas if you can change the environment, you'll get what you want.
Yeah, exactly. But then the argument would be like, well, shouldn't you be able to move without that counterbalance? At least the counterbalance showed us the joints go there. I don't have to do a whole bunch of passes. Right. Like they do it, you know what I mean? Like they have it. And then maybe where the FRC principles or whatever you want to call it, maybe you're going those tempo goblet squats with a lighter and lighter bell. Sit at the bottom of the squat with the bell and then slowly try to let go of the bell and hold the same position. Now we're talking about incorporating kind of both worlds.
Sure.
But yeah, I love giving people a little bit of slack, and all of a sudden their joints, it's like magic. It's like they're another person, and the counterbalance squat is a perfect example of that. The supine pullover is one too for the shoulders. Somebody may look so uncomfortable with a bar over their head, but if they have the ground there to like cue their back, they're laying on their back, and they can just control that rib cage a little bit and slowly let the weight pull their shoulders into position. All of a sudden their joints do it. It just like a combination of motor control and maybe a little bit of mobility, but I don't even know how, I can't even define that word yet. So
see, that's
whatever that means.
I'm really happy that you said that, because I've struggled with that for years, and like being through that system and everything. It's like, it's a very context dependent thing. It's totally dependent on person and environment. So I really appreciate that you just said that.
Stability is actually more defined in the literature. It's all about just resisting forces or moving through. They use the word perturbation a lot. Whereas like you're either resisting forces to hold a position, or you're moving through a desired excursion of range of motion while resisting, external forces or, gravity, the implement, or even your own body's intrinsic forces. But yeah, mobility is a gray one.
It really seems like it. Does anybody else have a question? You heard our answering machine in the background, probably.
No.
Quinn, so is the clinical athlete forums open to coaches now? I don't think it was when it first started. They
are. We haven't announced it because we don't want – it sounds weird. Like, I'm a terrible businessman. We don't want an influx of coaches. We want you – like, I want the coaches who are in there to be from this type of stuff. Like, it's – you know what I mean? It makes it really, really makes the quality really, really high. But the answer is yes.
Okay. Yeah, because I was creeping on the forum the other day, and it was like I saw I was open to coaches, and
there's a couple. Yeah,
I didn't realize it. So yeah, that was cool.
Yeah, we didn't make an official announcement. Kind of like invite only.
Top secret.
Super secret.
How's the Juggernaut training system stuff going? You're with them too.
Yeah, it's good, man. I mean, they are. So the way it works is it's kind of like we're both separate entities. My clinic is separate. With clinical athletes, totally separate from Juggernaut, but obviously we go back and forth, and they've been, I can't even express how instrumental they've been and invaluable for me. That having that platform to speak off of is awesome. And so we have a weightlifting team who 4 of them have moved to California to train here. And so they're resident athletes. That's their livelihood is the sport of weightlifting, which is cool because it didn't used to be like that. Like they all have their part-time, they have like coach and stuff, and online coaches and stuff like that too, but they're full-time athletes here at the facility. And then Chad the juggernaut, runs all of the fulfillment and everything out of this facility as well. So all the online stuff, the studio, all the where they make their videos is all done here in our offices. And so it's cool to see all that stuff. I know it's like every other day there's like a camera crew here, and I know something's happening. I just try not to get in the way.
Does he still look like Krusty the Clown?
Yeah, everybody looks pretty much the same. Yeah, he shaved his beard though.
Oh,
recently.
Very cool.
Yeah, it's great. I'm blessed, man. I couldn't ask for anything better than that.
Very fucking cool.
Yeah. Yeah, it's for me, and Max Ada is the weightlifting coach. And it's interesting because I just try not to get in their way too much. I think that these athletes train so hard and they're so specialized. It would be real easy to try to impart a bunch of rehab or like corrective stuff and this and that. And it's just like, you gotta let them do their thing. They're going to get dinged up because at the level that they train at. And you just try to maybe one thing here or there. And as long as nothing really, snaps off the bone, we're pretty much good to go. They're such good athletes. It's more about like talking them off a ledge when something a little bit wrong goes. Have to miss a couple of training sessions because they have an ache or a pain here or there, as opposed to just calling the ship off completely. So it's been an interesting learning experience for me too to work with those guys.
Yeah, I think it was Dan John who said like the cost of doing business and how training for health versus performance are different.
Oh yeah, no, they're totally different. Inverse.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
No, this shit's not healthy at all. It's terrible. It's terrible for you.
Right.
Yeah, you're just destroying yourself. And but that's their choice, and I get it. Sometimes people ask me about that, almost like guilting me into like, shouldn't you tell them not to do that? I'm like, no. Right. It's not like, first of all, it's not life or death, but that's their goal and it's a sport. And as long as they understand that, like we have that conversation though, what's gonna, let's say they have a meet coming up in a month or a couple weeks and something kind of bad, they strained something or pulled something or something's really tweaking and it's not great timing, so we'll have that conversation. Like you can push through this. It's not going to be great long-term. You kind of have to weigh the options, the short versus long-term scenarios. That's a common discussion.
Is the juice worth the squeeze? That type of thing.
For those, yeah, for sure. Yeah. For those guys, it usually is because like they have stipends that depend on their totals. For the vast majority of the people that I see and the people that anybody sees, the answer is usually no. Like we have some CrossFit Games athletes at the gym here as well, but again, the minority. The vast majority, we're having the conversation of like, what are you doing, man? You're training like a professional athlete, but you have very little experience. You overdosed this. You had 5 years of nothing before you came in and started destroying yourself for 4 months straight. Like we have that conversation daily where let's take 3 steps back and build a little bit of a foundation. And it's an ego trip for a lot of people, but what's cool is that the coaches are all kind of on board. We're all on the same page. And when you have that, it's very easy because it's not me going against the coaches. It's just me going against science, like programming, and the coaches and we have these conversations too, and they understand the principles. And so the athlete is kind of like, all right, I got everybody's on the same page and we got a team going. And so the buy-in is a lot better.
Okay.
And that's going back to a question earlier, having the clinician and the coach on the same page is so important.
Especially in the same facility, I'd imagine.
Oh yeah. It's real awkward, if people were butting heads. So that's, yeah. What else you guys got?
What's your next big event?
Big event. We got a bunch of courses coming up. That's for sure. We got a lot of them, probably like 12 to 15 over the course of the next year. I feel like I'm missing something as far as big events, but I'm not sure. I think it's just the courses. A lot of trying to put those on, and we have a team now. Other people are teaching them, not just me. So we're kind of coordinating that. Yeah.
How many guys you got on the team?
Just 2 right now. They teach 2 other ones teach the rehab course. it's good though, because they're both smarter than I am. And I'm always like, it shouldn't matter who's teaching the course. If the principles are the principles, if they're based on the science the best we understand it now, it shouldn't matter who's teaching the course. Maybe one person makes you laugh more than another, but if you're taking a course because of the presenter, you know what I mean? You're probably not there for the right reasons, or you're not going to get as much out of it. So I'm excited to not travel so much, but to also not be the face, because I don't like that. I want the face to be like the literature and the evidence and the community. So I
like that.
Yeah.
Quinn, do you have a link with all that stuff? If you send it to me, I can make sure I post it up for everybody.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. clinicalathlete.com/events is where all the things are, but I'll send you that.
Appreciate it.
For sure.
What else we got, everybody?
Are there 18 people here? Is that a real number?
It should be, yeah. Yeah, I think that's about right.
18 people.
Yeah.
I start
Quinn, what are your thoughts about what's going on with CrossFit with all the torn pecs right now?
Yeah. Gosh. I think, I've seen a lot, there's a lot of conversation. There's like, well, PEDs is probably top of the list. And then I've seen overtraining and then undertraining. The first one, I don't know. That's all speculation. The second two are, contrasting. So it's an interesting dialogue. I'm of the assumption or like understanding that most tendon issues occur if you have an acute failure like that. It wasn't ready for the dosage. I have a hard time believing, I don't know, like overtraining a tendon to where it snaps. Generally, what we're looking at is actually training the tendon to be able to withstand those loads. And I just think that perhaps we don't get, in CrossFit and in this sport of weightlifting, other than powerlifting, you don't get a ton of like isotonic or slow strength, like eccentric loading of your pecs. It's all really fast. They do push-ups in CrossFit, but they're all fast as hell. And all they do is ring dips. They're usually kipping. I'm sure that a lot of those guys train strict dips, but I'm not sure at the volume at regionals and with the force that a kip in competition. I'm thinking that they just weren't prepared. And it sounds crazy because these guys are the best. And some of the guys that tore their pecs were on their way to the games, in the top 3, and then boom, gone. But I just feel that a tendon failure is usually because it wasn't prepared for the dosing. The overtraining conversation would be, well, maybe it was just on the verge of failure because it wasn't getting the chance to recover. But I find that hard to believe because there's so many facets in CrossFit that you have to train. It's hard to overtrain any one area other than just fatigue in general. You know what I mean? So I'm just going like super basic 101 tendinopathy. I'd probably be incorporating more slow isotonic work for the pecs in the form of dips, even bench press. Deficit push-ups, get more acclimated to shoulder extension at end range. Maybe some FRC.
Build a concept. Like everything they do is so fast. So train slow to reciprocate like the opposing effect.
Train slow for a while. Yeah, we do it with the weightlifters too. If they've got time, before competition. We can't fault anyone. The premise of CrossFit is be prepared for whatever. It shouldn't matter. So that's part of it. The argument can be made, well, they weren't prepared, so they're not the fittest. You know what I mean? And it's just, unfortunately, it's an extreme example because now we've got careers on the line. But it tis the sport. I don't think we're going to be able to predict or reduce risk because next year it'll be something else. I think they can look at the programming a little bit more and say that this is maybe setting us up for something, but oh, there's a chat here. Oh, Todd had to pee.
Yeah. I was holding it for a whole time. It was like 45 minutes straight, man. I was pretty proud of myself. Pissed my pants or something. Guys, we have anything else to finish up with Quinn before we let him go? Go ahead,
I got a question on the Quinn on the